Losing Ignatius. By Michael O'Rourke. It was with purely amiable intentions, I assure you, that I coaxed Ignatius to my chambers on this most extraordinary eve. For I merely wished to bring closure to a most incessant debate, of which we had reached an apparent impasse. Now Ignatius and I have long argued on matters of metaphysical theory and on transcendental themes, but a most contentious point of dispute was the feasibility of a lateral realm of existence, or perhaps more aptly, subsistence, one synchronously occupying our space but operating beyond the purview of our rather limited and frankly, quite primitive senses. I had boasted to Ignatius of having had, perchance, found physical evidence of such a reality or plane within the pages of a most antiquated collection of enigmatic text. The transcript fell into my possession most serendipitously while on sabbatical in Iraq, where I first learned of its esoteric origins, and bartered shrewdly for their contents from the hands of an Arabic trader selling curiosities at a bazaar on the streets of Tikrit. Ignatius, the consummate empiricist, would settle for nothing less than tangible proof. On this proviso he was most obstinate. Ignatius had travelled conceitedly far this night, and amidst inclement weather no less, to view the peculiar scripture of which I had spoken. I put to him that we could lay bare its contents jointly and determine the matter of its veracity thusly. My scheming ventured no further or more nefarious than to resolve fully and lastly the quarrel on which we are now divided. You can fathom how it vexed me fully I say, when upon his arrival I, for lack of a better term, misplaced him. Ignatius had arrived at my residence unaccosted and without incident, much like he has done on numerous occasions. I received him most agreeably and endeavored to indulge him. He paused to make mention of an alabaster bust of Bacchus that adorns an interior aperture at the inlet to my study, and which I had procured on a recent trip to Crete. I poured us a snifter of port, of a variety for which I knew he had a fondness. I made it my charge that he would find himself at ease. I stoked the fire to arrest his chill, and regaled for him the full account of the archaic manuscript, to what expense it was that I did acquire it, and of the palpable reluctance of the merchant to part with it. Ignatius commented on the guile such a barter represented. "Congratulations, Phineas. The limitless extent of your credulity is now known on 4 continents," he said with an acerbic tone. "Do you recall your purchase of the rough draft to the Dead Sea Scrolls from that street vendor in Cairo? 'Twas the unhinged frenetic ramblings of a psychotic transient, scribbled on the verso of some discarded parchment paper, if memory serves. We had reclined to the comfort of the leather settee, a fine Corinthian leather. Ignatius continued to surreptitiously visually peruse the articles of my chambers until a most curious specimen sparked his closer observance. "Ah yes? Corvide corvus," I interjected. "A wonderful example of the finest taxidermy craftsmanship," I went on to explain. "It's a large black bird, perched maniacally upon your mantle," Ignatius retorted. "But where is this evidence of yours, Phineas? Surely you didn't summon me here merely to gaze upon your dead fowl?" he questioned. I retrieved the curious item from the confines of a cherry escritoire and began to unfurl the leather binds to release fully the pages from within the ethereal manuscript. It was in that moment that a rather mundane evening hitherto gave way to otherworldly mishap, for I began to read aloud impetuously from the ancient scripture some random, cryptic incantation that had readily caught my eye. I was scarcely through the passage when the reticent Ignatius promptly vanished. An ominous fume that arose from the settee was all that remained to attest that Ignatius had sooner been there. After an exhaustive investigation, I had determined that I was indeed alone, and bereft of any explanation as to the current whereabouts of my former colleague. Admittedly, I pondered briefly to perhaps cravenly abscond from the scene, to perhaps a vista such as Paraguay, or sister state with equally convoluted extradition law. But it was then that I did hear, from some unperceived dimension, the civil queries of a composed Ignatius. "Phineas, you imbecile! Of all the lack-witted, asinine, incredulous acts of stupidity, what the devil have you done to me?" The chamber echoed thusly. And it is here where the prologue itself curtails, as you are now fully abreast of the whole sordid, ill-fated affair, such now as it stands, for amidst an inscrutable and unfathomable ether, of where it is I do not know, Ignatius awaits a reply. Ignatius, you are gleefully heard. My mind is eased greatly by the amicable echoes of your voice. However, it does seem, lamentably so, that I've inadvertently ousted you wholly from this existence. I pray you are still in good health? I respond with truly the utmost regard. It is not merely my health that remains in question if you don't remedy this outrage at once. He said tersely. How do we dare do so? I questioned brusquely. Let us think astutely for a moment of the unearthly venture to which we are now on the precipice. Are we to turn our backs so audaciously, so cavalierly to such an extraordinary undertaking? Surely not, I say. I protest. Phineas, I toy with you, not at all. I warn you. Undo this dastardly deed, forthwith. He vigorously commands. Concern yourself with the predicament no longer, Ignatius. I acquiesce. For I am, as we speak, reviewing the particulars for your expeditious return. I reassure him. Optimism has long been one of my foibles, for I knew not the particulars requisite to reverse the deed, let alone reviewing them. I shuffle studiously through the incomprehensible pages, for my Aramaic is found to be wanting, praying that I might stumble upon some reciprocal prose that would return Ignatius to the here and now. I happen upon a verse in which I have the highest confidence, and begin to orate it boldly. A ghastly shriek erupts within the confines of my chambers. A shadowy figure does flit and flutter. It is Corvide Corvus. I have vivified the raven. The fiendish creature scales to the summit of my study and begins an insidious descent. With my eyes keenly fixated on the vile beast, I scratch, I reach, I claw wildly for some sort of cudgel in which to fend off the foul creature. Such an instrument now lastly finds my probing grasp. I begin to beat the vertebrate profusely with a teak walking stick I'd acquired while in Bavaria, adorned with a masterfully crafted bone handle, a fine piece of artisanship, but I digress. I pummel the infernal beast violently until it falls to my feet, thoroughly eviscerated. What are you doing, you clumsy fool? Is there no end to your incompetence? The inspirational utterances of Ignatius permeate the chamber. Fret no longer, Ignatius, for that raven shall torment us, nevermore. I have studied and reviewed most ardently all of the text. All is well, for your liberation is soon at hand. I comfort him thusly. I key on another passage and read it loud, read it vociferously. And at its end I seek, I look, I scrutinize for any changes in my midst, but, alas, I see none at all. You bungling, half-witted, incorrigible buffoon. The chamber rattles. I hear once again the placid uttering of Ignatius, but this time somehow more local, for it echoes much more closely than before. But still I see nothing of him here nor there. Present yourself, Ignatius, and let us toast to your return. I plead. Over here, you ignoramus. Ignatius loudly summons me. I turn to find to my utter astonishment that speaking from the alabaster bust of Bacchus was the genial Ignatius. I have conjured him into the statuette. I have had enough of your inept chicanery. Step closer that I might in some way mortally wound you. Ignatius beckoned. I held my ground, but decided that this was indeed progress of a sort. I'm not sure I have ever seen you look more personable, Ignatius, or less stoic. I noted. Heavens, Phineas, will you spare me nothing? Is there yet a way I can amuse you further? He questions. I admit I ponder momentarily, but Ignatius now grows irascible and patently weary of this unearthly venture. I've long had an uncanny intuition into the dispositions of Ignatius. It is time to earnestly complete the deed. Once again, I commenced to orate the ancient scripture, building slowly in the cadence and then louder, and then louder. As my voice grew more demanding, I sensed a stirring in the air. As I speak it more verbosely, I feel a tremble in my bones, but read on ever do I still. I am suddenly and vehemently caught in the throes of a raging tempest. A whipping tumultuous gale of atmospheric rage, a broiling maelstrom churns ominously in the pith. I am compelled to lean forcibly into its prevailing current simply to remain erect. The pages of scripture flail wickedly as my grip on them tightens instinctively. I do not suspend the reading as the verses ramble on. The voluminous contents of my private collection are wrenched from their shelves, and alas, the cupboards were sated fully. I am bludgeoned to and fro as books swirl wantonly in the turmoil. My head incurs a glancing blow from an anthology of Poe. It felt like his complete works. But still I do not pause the reading, and in a rapture of commotion the occurrence does cease. And there sits Ignatius, comfortably on the settee. Ah, Ignatius, welcome back. I trust you are none the worse for wear? I query most sincerely. Silence. Not another inane word shall I hear from you this night. Just fetch me some port, a carafe, to dull my senses, that we may speak on level ground. He orders. I decide it prudent at this juncture to wholly comply. I claw my way through the strewn of debris in order to accommodate his wishes. It is upon my return that I do discover that where once sat the alabaster bust of the ethereal Bacchus now rests a less than flattering effigy of Ignatius. And etched indomitably into the stone, for time immemorial, a manifest expression of overwrought indignation. I question as to whether I have a sufficient quantity of port in the cellar to make mention to him of such a fact this night, but I fathom that I shall never have such a quantity. Ignatius. Here, drink your port, then allow me to lastly, and indubitably settle our quarrel.